Good morning, friends. My name is Tanya, and this is She's At It Again. And today what I want to do is just do a little experiment. I have not tried these two recipes that I'm aware of. I may have tried one of them, but it's been so long ago I don't remember it. I want to make a good saltine cracker, namely because I want oyster crackers for when I make things like Greek chili, which that video has already come out, so you're aware of Cincinnati chili or Greek chili. But it's just hard to find organic oyster crackers anywhere. So what I want to do is learn how to make them so I can keep them in stock and not have to worry about going to the store and finding them. And plus, they're $6 a box. So anyway, all that being said, let's get to work on this recipe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make half of each of these recipes. And there's, like I said, there's two recipes. I'm going to make half because if it's not a good recipe, I don't want to waste all my ingredients on it. So what I'll do is in the description, I will put the ingredients for full recipes for these. So in this bowl, I have 150 grams of flour. Now, if you have a digital scale, it's going to be a whole lot easier for you because I don't know what the measure would be in just a measuring cup. So 150 grams of bread flour. So a full recipe would be 300 grams of flour. This is just organic all-purpose flour. It calls for bread flour, but all I have to do is add some vital wheat gluten, which I have, but I'm not that concerned about the texture of it at this point. I just want the taste of it to be right. So I'll need a half teaspoon of, let's do the yeast first. I need a half teaspoon of yeast. Some of this is measured by weight and some of it's measured by volume, so we're going with the volume on this. And a half teaspoon of salt. And this is a half teaspoon measure right here, if you're wondering. Give this a stir just to get it all mixed in there. You don't want to put the salt directly on the yeast. I'm not a chemist, but I keep being told in several things I've read that you don't want to put salt directly on yeast because it would kill it or something. I don't know. I don't really know if that's true, but I'm just not willing to risk it. I'm going to put in here 50 grams of warm water. This is about 100 degrees. And 20 grams of organic extra virgin olive oil. And you could also use melted butter, I'm sure, and it would be fine. Melted butter just gives it such a good taste. But we're going to go with the oil. I'm just following the instructions here. I don't remember where this recipe came from because I didn't write the source down. But if I knew the source, I would give them credit in the description too, but I didn't write it down. But it was so long ago, chances are they're not around to complain about it anyway. It is, excuse me, it is a rainy day here in Arkansas today. And the temperatures aren't bad. It's pleasant outside, but it is raining like crazy. And normally this is my errand running day of the week. I have one day of the week that I normally always run errands on. But because my doggies are so deathly afraid of thunder and lightning and the rain, anytime they hear the rain hitting the pipe above our vent hood in the kitchen above the stovetop, they just shiver with fear. So just like any good doggy mama does, I'm staying home from running errands just so they'll be more comfortable. I don't want to leave them in the crate just to go run errands when I don't necessarily need anything that badly. I can always run errands tomorrow when the sun's shining. They have been sticking close by this morning, to say the least. Okay, this should just gather up. I don't think it's supposed to be a really wet dough. Make sure I got all the water out of here that I always second guess myself on the measure of wet ingredients. just because I think, oh, this feels a little too dry, and then all of a sudden it comes together. But this actually feels pretty dry. I may add some more water to it. Just a tiny bit. You'd think by measuring it on the scale it would just be perfect, because that's how I do my sourdough bread. I have to measure my ingredients. Not that there's that many. You've got flour, water, salt, and starter. So there's not that many ingredients, but I do measure those on a digital scale. And it comes out pretty much the same every single time. Okay, this requires that we let it rise for 2 hours since it does have yeast in it. Now the other one I'm going to make does not have yeast in it, so it requires no rising time. So what I'm going to do is set this aside, let it rest for 2 hours, and in the meantime I'll gather my ingredients together. We'll come back and we'll start making the other one. Okay, my instructions say to mix it, cover, and allow to rise in a warm place for about 2 hours. So we've got it pretty much coming together in a ball. So that doesn't feel too bad. I'm glad I added the other water to it, or it would be just too crumbly. And besides, if something's too dry, it just doesn't allow the yeast to make it rise enough, just in my opinion, from my experience that I've had with breads that I've made and just not added enough liquid to them, and it's like it's like a chicken trying to hatch out of an egg, and the egg's just too tough, or the eggshell's just too hard and they can't get out of it. So anyway, we want that to be able to rise as much as it's supposed to. Okay, I'm going to get a cover and put this in a warm place, but I'll get my ingredients together for the other recipe I have, put this to rest, and we'll be right back. Okay, so here we are. We're ready to make the second option for our saltine crackers, oyster crackers, whatever you want to call it. Actually, it all depends on how you cut them. That's it. That's the only difference in a saltine and an oyster cracker. Oyster crackers are small and round, and saltines are generally square, but if you are very cautious like I am about cutting them, it doesn't matter. They're just random shapes, just geometric. Could be round, could be square, could be a shape like Mississippi. I mean, it just doesn't matter. It's all crackers, and they're going to eat them, and nobody's going to care. So in the bowl, again, I've divided this recipe in half because I just don't want to use all the ingredients if it's not a great recipe. So this recipe actually comes from a lady named Lori Brown. Her YouTube channel is called Whippoorwill Holler, and they live in Imboden, Arkansas, which I actually have relatives in Imboden, Arkansas, so it makes me think that's probably a small place. I'm sure they know each other. So she's a really sweet lady, and I like watching her. But this is just recipe for crackers. So the recipe calls for 2.5 cups of flour, so I have 1 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour in here. I have 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda, and I have 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So I'm just going to give that a stir just so you won't get a blob of salt in one bite and then no salt in another. Kind of want it to be all mixed up before you put your liquid ingredients in there. She described this as basically like making a pie crust. If that's the case, I could do this in my sleep because I'm all about making the pie crust. So the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons of butter, so I'm going to use 1.5 tablespoons. But you know the drill. I have my grater in the freezer, so let me get that out. Now I have a different grater than my box grater. This one is one with a lot smaller holes in it. So hopefully you can see that on both cameras. So we'll get this butter out of the way. I'm going to try to touch it as little as possible because my hands, I'm sure, are a lot warmer than what this grater is. I only put that grater in there maybe 15 minutes ago, so it's not as cold as what it could be, but it's pretty cold. It's colder than what it would be if I just pulled it out of the drawer, which I keep it in generally. Now, if the butter would have been frozen, it would have grated a lot easier, but at least I'm getting some of them in little tiny pieces. And that's all I'm worried about, is just getting it in tiny pieces. But I have my fork right here, so that's going to work out fine. Most of it looks like it's going to stick to my fingers anyway. But we will get it off of there. All this is doing is getting the butter in little pieces. If you haven't seen the video for making homemade buttermilk biscuits, the advantage to using that grater is that you're going to get the butter in little tiny pieces, and each piece is coated in flour, and that's where those little pillows of flakiness come from once you start baking it. The butter's incorporated better into the mixture. You can use a pastry blender. I used a pastry blender for, my whole life. So just the grater just is a good way to go about. The only disadvantage is you got a grater to clean, but it's either a grater or pastry blender. So, and people always talk about using a couple of knives. I'm like, that would take me probably 45 minutes to do that with 2 knives. But now with a fork, I'm pretty prolific with a fork. I can get it done with a fork, but 2 knives, I don't even understand that process. I've never seen anybody do it that way. So I'm sure it's possible. Maybe I'm too country to understand it. So if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm just basically tossing this. I'm not mashing it down by any means, just kind of tossing the butter with the flour. And you don't even have to cut it in at that point. It's done. So that grater takes the place of a pastry blender or the 2 knives that I don't understand, or a fork or anything like that you'd cut it in with. Okay, so to this, we're going to add a 1/2 cup of cold milk. This is whole milk. I always use whole milk. And people have asked me that before, why don't you use skim milk? Because unless you buy raw milk from a farm, which I do occasionally to make yogurt with, but I buy whole milk because vitamin D is added to it, and vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. Vitamin D is a hormone. It is fat-soluble, and if you don't have enough fat in there, it's not going to get carried to the parts of your body that it would if you have fat included in it. So if that doesn't make sense, then just ask somebody who's a lot smarter at it than I am. But according to what I've read, and I've checked into it quite a bit because vitamin D is kind of a passion of mine, and vitamin D is just a better choice for me because I want to utilize every bit of that vitamin D I can consume. All right, this is coming together pretty nicely. You don't want to just knead it like you would bread dough, but you want it to come together nicely. And I think I remember her saying in her video to let this rest for just a bit. So that's what we're going to do. In fact, I'm going to put it in the fridge. I think if I have room in the fridge, I'm going to put it in the fridge and let it rest in there just so it'll stay nice and cold. And then we'll roll it out. I remember her saying to roll it out just as thin as you can possibly get it, and that's what gives it those flaky layers. So that's what we're going to do. And I have a little bit of different idea than what I saw her do, so we'll try it, and y'all can just see me mess up if it messes it up. So we'll just learn from our mistakes as we go. That's the way I generally do things. I'll make something, and when it's done and it flops, and I'll go, you know what? I know what I did wrong. And then here I go doing it again. Okay, that's not too awfully sticky, so that's good consistency. All right, so this is what our dough looks like. It's really soft. If I were to stick my finger in the middle of it, it would definitely be sticky, but it's kind of coated in the flour from the bowl, so it's fine. I usually try to scratch all this off or scrape it off with a scraper just because I don't want all the stuff left on the edge of the bowl when it could be used in the dough itself. Now we added 1/4 teaspoon of salt to this, but there will be more salt on top of these. Everybody knows saltines have salt on the top of them, unless you get the ones that are not salted. But we'll probably give this a little spray with water and put some salt on it so it won't just bounce off the top onto the baking sheet. All right, we'll put this in the fridge, and I'll get my stuff ready to roll it out, and then we'll come back when we start doing that. So hang in there. All right, we're back with our recipe number 2 dough for crackers and oyster crackers and saltines. So I'm gonna get some flour on my counter because I know it's sticky enough to stick to my counter. Not that I couldn't get it off, but I'd rather not have to deal with this now. I think when I saw Mrs. Brown do this recipe, she divided her dough in half and rolled it out that way, so I don't have to do that because I've only made half a recipe. So we'll just see how well this fits. I may wind up dividing this in half anyway because I'm not big on doing really large pieces. They just tend to be too flimsy. Let's go ahead and cut this in half. Put that well floured one right there. This is one of those times you can practice your rolling pin skills because it really doesn't matter if it turns out square or what. I used to tell my daughter, if it's the shape of an amoeba, you probably know that I'm the one that rolled it out. Although I'm getting pretty good at tortillas. I'm getting better at tortillas. I should say that, better. Not good, but better. And I can roll out a round pizza crust. I'm okay with the pizza. I don't know why that's easier for me. And I can roll out a round pie crust. But we're going to try to get this as thin as we can. I have my oven preheating right now to 375. And I have my piece of parchment on my baking sheet. So like I said earlier, I mentioned earlier, I'm going to try something different than what she did. I think I remember her cutting hers out into squares, and she even had a measuring, like a ruler, bless her heart. Oh my word. I am just not that concerned about mine being pretty or square or anything except for edible and delicious. I want them to taste good, but I do not care if they're the same size or not. But I remember her, that's pretty thin, folks, right there. That's like kind of scary thin almost. So thin it's falling apart. But I remember her, I think I remember her brushing each one of hers with water and then sprinkling salt on it maybe. Or maybe that was somebody else that I watched. But I just thought, oh, come on. Let's just do that in one fell swoop there. So what I'm going to try instead, and this may be a complete failure, and you are my witnesses, I'm going to finish rolling this out on my parchment. Acts like it doesn't really want to be rolled out, but I'm going to dock it with one of these. Now you've probably gone to a pizza place and seen them do this on the pizza dough, and it makes the holes in it, and that's all crackers need is holes in them. So bless her heart, she was taking something and being so careful to take, I think she used a fork and was just poking little holes in those crackers so gently, and it just took her so long. So we're just going to do that. Then I'm going to transfer this to my baking sheet. And I could just bake this in there like that, but I think what I might do is just kind of score it with this, not necessarily in perfect squares, but just areas where I can break it off after it bakes and gets crispy. Hey, our oven's ready just in the nick of time. Now, if you want to do oyster crackers at this point, you just got to find you a little circle thing. Now, I have something, I have one of these things. I don't even know where this came from, and I probably took this off a bottle or something that was about to go in the trash thinking, oh, that's about the size of an oyster cracker. Or if I wanted bigger ones, this is the lid from a detergent bottle from years ago, and I probably had the same thought. That's just big enough for a little cookie. Actually, I make some little, they're like little, what am I trying to think of? Little bridal shower cookies. I think they're called cream wafers, and they just have this little buttery filling in between. Oops, I think my microphone went off. So chances are my battery's pooped out. We'll try it again. But they're about the size of that cutter, and I probably saw that detergent lid and thought, oh, this would be a perfect cookie cutter for that. I'm forever saving something from the trash because it looks like the perfect size to cut out something. Okay, so that's what these look like. We've scored them. You can tell they are not going to be all the same size. It kind of looks ridiculous, but I think these might work out fine. So we'll get the other tray done. We'll put these in here, and these are supposed to be baked. Oops, you know what? I didn't put my salt on them. Let's do that. And I need to spray them with my water. This is water from the Berkey, so I want it to be a little bit wet before I sprinkle them with salt. This doesn't spray out an immense amount of water. Normally by the time I get everything sprayed, the first part I sprayed is already dried up. But it has such a fine mist, it doesn't ever cause anything to have a blob of water on it, which is what I like about that bottle. Okay. Just a little sprinkling of Himalayan pink salt. And in the oven they go. All right, I'm not gonna leave the cameras on because my microphone's gone down. I have changed the battery in it. So I'll get these rolled out for another pan, but we'll check these when these come out. We'll see what they look like. Okay, just took these out of the oven and put the other ones in the oven. And I don't even know how long I cooked them. I didn't set my timer, so sorry. I've got 2 cameras and a microphone to remember to turn off and on, and I do good to turn the lights on and off. So these are really thin. These look so good. Okay, give it a taste. Of course, they're still hot. Ooh, that's good, guys. Okay. The other one with the yeast in it is going to have to really be really good. Oh my goodness. These don't, you know, I kind of expected it to just taste kind of like a pie crust, but it doesn't. It actually tastes like, I don't know how to explain. When you get a saltine out of the box, like those brand name saltines that, whatever they're called, you get them out of the box and it just has that certain taste to it. These taste exactly like that. Miss Brown from Whippoorwill Holler. Man, she knows what she's talking about. These are good. Okay, we're still going to try the other ones. We had those resting. I'm supposed to take them out. I don't know why I did that at 10 o'clock. It says rest for 2 hours. They're going to rest for longer than 2 hours because I eat lunch at in 2 hours. So we'll take the other ones out. We've got a nice batch of saltines here. These are worth trying to make oyster crackers. Now, I will say this. Oyster crackers are real puffy. So what I might consider is that these are great for saltines as far as thin crackers to eat with soups and things like that and dips and stuff. But the other ones might just puff up enough because of the yeast in it to where those would be more appropriate for oyster crackers. So if they still have a really good taste to them, but just the difference is they puff up more than these, then I would say we'd use those for oyster crackers, these for saltines. But these are so stinking good, guys. Okay, definitely need to try these. But hang with us here, stick around, and the next video you'll see is of us rolling out our other ones. Maybe we'll make a few little oyster crackers to see if they're puffy enough. So we'll see what comes of it, but stick around. Okay, our first recipe that we started with this cracker recipe with the yeast, the dough has been resting for 2 hours now, and the place that in my house that is the warm area that doesn't have a draft in it is the closet where my water heater is. We have a 95-gallon Marathon water heater, and it keeps it the perfect temperature in there to germinate my tomato seeds when I plant those. So that's been full of tomatoes for a couple of weeks now. Well, a few weeks until I got big enough to put in bigger cups. But I have a shelf in there, and it just so happened that I had enough space in there to put that bowl, so that's where it's been resting for the last couple of hours. So that worked out perfectly. This dough has, let's see, how can I describe it to you? It has gotten softer. It felt a little dry earlier when I first put it in there, so it has gotten considerably softer, and it has relaxed, which is what dough does when you let it rest for a while. Just like us. You let it rest for a while and it relaxes. How about that? All right, so we're going to roll this out again as thinly as we can, just like the other ones. The other ones turned out so good, and what I wound up doing, the ones on the edges were a little more crispy than the ones in the center. So what I did was I took the ones on the edges, put them on a cooling rack, put the other ones back in the oven after I turned the oven off, and let them toast up just a little more because I don't want any moisture in those crackers at all. When I seal that jar off, I don't want the moisture to permeate the rest of them, so it needs to be as dry as possible. So you want to bake them until all that moisture is gone out of them. Now I will say, this dough does not feel as easy to roll out as that first batch did, for sure. And it seems like on the other batch, my batch of dough was about the same size, and I rolled out 2 big giant rectangles of it, so this may not be anywhere near as thin as my first batch. But we shall see. Just an experiment altogether. And it started thundering again just a few minutes ago, so I have a doggy on each side of me. Zoe's right here and Lacey's right there. They get almost as close to me as they can. Sometimes Zoe actually sits on my feet while I'm standing still at the counter. As long as I don't move, she's good. But they do not like that thunder. I feel like I'm rolling out egg roll wrappers. And by the way, that's one of those things that I've been checking out online just to see what the requirements are for it, because I cannot find organic egg roll wraps. Now it might say non-GMO, but that's still not what I want. And they just smell like vinegar when I open up the package. They don't taste bad. Of course, I've used them in the past because that's all I had. But I'm thinking about attempting to make some of those just to see how that'll turn out, because I have several egg roll recipes that I think would be fun to share with you, and I haven't made them in a while. But you can buy the kind from the store if you want, but this girl's going to try to make her own. It may flop, but I'm going to try to make my own. We'll see how that goes. Okay, that's about as thin as I'm going to get that dough right now. That's thin enough to where you can see my hand through it. So again, we're going to put it on here. And I probably need to dock this again. I don't know that I'm as crazy about this. This works well on thick dough, like thick pizza dough, but with thin dough like this, it almost tears little holes in it, and I'm not necessarily a fan of that, so may have just to resort to go back to the using a fork if I do many of these. And I might need to use something. I might need to use a pizza cutter for that, just simply because it's not as soft and compliant as the other dough was. So let's do it this way. Again, I have my oven preheated for 375. I haven't had it on this whole time. I actually turned it off. And then I just turned it back on just now. But 375, and it says to bake these for 10 to 15 minutes. And again, this is just water. Filtered water from the Berkey that I'm spraying on these, and the only reason I'm spraying on here is just to make the salt stick to them. I had a little bit of salt left over on the edges, so we'll use that first. If you have some super fine salt or a really good salt mill, that'd be good. I have a salt mill and it will turn it into powder, but I'm just going to use that for right now. Because again, these are the experiment. This really doesn't need a whole lot of flour because this dough is so dry. I'm just wondering if maybe I don't think I mismeasured because I had a digital scale, but there's always that possibility. I'm not above making a mistake. That's for sure. We know that for a fact. But again, that's the recipe that I don't remember where I got it. So I can't look back and go, oh, you know what? I wrote this down wrong maybe. Sometimes I get a little pink spot in things, and that's just from the pink Himalayan salt. But sometimes I think, did I cut my finger? And then I remember it's the salt making that pink spot on there. Okay, if these puff up big, these will definitely be the ones that I would use for oyster crackers. Number one, it doesn't make quite as much. And I could cut out those little circles, and you can always use the negative part of the cutouts for just odd-shaped oyster crackers, maybe. I'm going to get these in the oven just in time to sit down and eat some lunch, probably. Because that clock is striking 12, and that means it's noon. Okay, let's see how we can fit that on there. Oh, I didn't dock those. Oh well, if these puff up and look like jellyfish, that'll be the reason why. Because I didn't poke holes in them. This is the point where they usually do that, is right here after they've already cut them out. All right, our oven's preheated. I'm going to pop these in. And we'll set our timer for, let's set it for 10. We can always add more time to it. And we'll see how that works. We'll come back in just a bit, see what they look like. Our timer went off at the 10-minute mark. I turned it on for 5 more minutes, and it still has just less than 2 minutes to go. So I'm going to turn the timer off and the oven off, but I'm going to get at least one tray of these out. I'll get these out. These are the ones that were docked. And so they have little holes in them, and they didn't rise up near as much as the other ones did. These other ones have some big bubbles of puffiness to them, but these still look really pretty. Of course, they're hot. Things just taste better when they're hot. These are still good. Honestly, I would say the first ones were easier to work with. The other ones had milk and these have water. These have yeast. The first ones did not. these have oil. The first ones, the other ones had butter. But I think as far as the taste, the other ones with the milk, the butter, and no yeast probably had a taste closer to that, what you would consider the taste of a saltine. But these still have a really good flavor to them. I would never ever say discard this recipe and only use the other one. This is really good. This has a good flavor. It has a fabulous texture to it. Very, very light, very crisp. I can see when these would cool off that they would be really nice. And I'll show you what these look like. I put them in this bucket right here. But these are the ones from the first batch. And I cooked them so they were kind of toasty. But again, they have butter and they have milk in them, so that fat's going to brown them up a bit. But these are the ones from the second one, so you can just see the difference in that. Let me hold them over here so you can get a good look at them. But anyway, so I'd say both of those were worth every ounce of effort that you would put into making them. These take a little longer. Those are a shorter time period, of course, but it depends on if you're in a hurry. So thanks for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed this. And I will put the recipe for both of these in the description. These will be considered the ones with yeast in them, and these would be considered the ones made with milk and butter. So just so you know, that's that. I think these have a saltine taste to them, but I can't really judge for sure on this one because they're still hot. But they both baked up really crispy, but just get them super, super thin, and you should have a good bowl of crackers when you're done. So we look forward to sharing something with you again soon, and thanks for joining us. Thanks.